Sometimes the heaviest burdens are not the ones we lift with our hands, but the ones we carry quietly in our minds. This story might begin with a moment that makes you smile, even laugh, but by the end, it may leave you looking at your own life a little differently. Long ago, in a land where rivers sparkled like silver ribbons and tall trees swayed like gentle guardians of the earth, two monks walked along a winding path. The day was bright, the sun spilling golden light across the road, yet each monk carried a different kind of weight. The first was Master Arun, an old monk of 60. His face was weathered like an old tree trunk, lines carved by time and wisdom. But there was always that faint smile on his lips, the kind that told you he had already made peace with the world. His eyes carried kindness, and even when silence wrapped around him, it was never empty, it was calm. Beside him walked Dev, just 25, a monk whose heart was still a battlefield. His eyes were sharp, his steps quick, and his robes, though the same as his master's, seemed heavier because of the rules he carried inside him. He had chosen this path of discipline with seriousness, but often he confused discipline with judgment. They had been walking since morning, their sandals slapping against the muddy ground left behind by a heavy rain. Birds chirped in the trees, the smell of wet earth filled the air, and sometimes the only sound was the steady rhythm of their breathing. After hours of silence, they came upon a river. It wasn't wide, but the current was strong, pushing against rocks and swirling with force. Dev's eyes narrowed as he studied it, already calculating how they might cross. But before he could even think of a plan, something caught his attention. At the riverbank stood a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 20. Her silk sari glimmered in shades of deep red and gold, beautiful but terribly impractical for the muddy ground she stood on. Her hands clutched the folds of her dress, and her face, oh, her face told a story without words. Her brows were knitted in worry. Her lips trembled as though she had whispered 1,000 prayers to herself already. She wanted to cross, but fear held her in place. Master Arun noticed her instantly. His smile softened even more, and he stepped toward her with the gentleness of a grandfather approaching a frightened child. "Do you need help crossing?" he asked, his voice calm, almost like a lullaby. The woman looked at him, startled by his kindness, then quickly nodded. Relief flashed in her eyes like the first spark of dawn after a long night. Before Dev could even protest, Arun bent down, scooped the woman into his arms, and stepped into the river. The water splashed around them, rising against his robes, but he walked steadily, each step sure and strong. Dev stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. He almost wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. His 60-year-old master carrying a young woman as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. It was funny, but also shocking. On the far bank, Arun gently placed the woman down. She straightened her sari, bowed deeply, and whispered, "Thank you." Without a word, Arun nodded and walked on. The woman disappeared down a path lined with wildflowers, and just like that, the moment was over. But not for Dev. He followed, but his steps were no longer peaceful. His jaw tightened, his lips pressed into a thin line. Inside, his thoughts screamed, "We are monks. We are not supposed to touch women, not supposed to break rules, especially not for someone so young, so beautiful. What will people say if they knew? How can my master, my example, do something so careless?" For 3 long hours, Dev walked behind Arun, his thoughts heavier with every step. The birds sang, the river faded behind them. The wind carried the smell of wild jasmine, but Dev noticed none of it. He was too busy carrying his anger. Finally, unable to keep it inside any longer, he burst out, "Master!" His voice cut through the forest silence like a blade. "We are monks. We are not supposed to touch women, especially not young, beautiful ones. Why would you do such a thing?" Arun stopped. Slowly, he turned to face Dev. His eyes were calm, not angry, not defensive, just calm, like a lake untouched by wind. He let the silence sit between them for a moment before speaking. "My son," he said softly, "I set her down at the river's edge hours ago. Why are you still carrying her?" The words fell like a bell in Dev's chest. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His anger began to dissolve, replaced by something he didn't expect: realization. He wasn't angry at his master. He wasn't even angry at the woman. He was angry at himself for carrying thoughts, rules, and judgments so heavy that he could no longer seek kindness for what it was. For the rest of the journey, Dev walked in silence again. But this silence was different. It wasn't filled with anger. It was filled with reflection. For the first time, he felt the weight of his thoughts. And for the first time, he understood what it meant to let go. And perhaps this is where the story becomes about us. Because don't we all do what Dev did? We carry things long after the moment has passed. A sharp word from someone we love, a mistake we made years ago, a jealousy we try to hide, a disappointment that still stings. We drag it along step after step until it becomes heavier than anything we could ever hold in our hands. We laugh at small moments, we cry at old wounds, but deep inside we carry them still. This story reminds us of something powerful. Sometimes what weighs us down is not the burden itself, it's our refusal to put it down. So ask yourself, what are you still carrying? What memory, what anger, what shame, what pain have you clutched long after its time has passed? Maybe tonight when you close your eyes, you can imagine yourself at that river. Imagine the old monk placing the burden on the ground, smiling gently and walking on. And maybe you can do the same. Because life feels lighter, not when we escape burdens, but when we finally learn to let them go.